Well, my name is Guillaume Bougard. I'm French. I live in Paris, France. I'm 59 years old. I've discovered reggae music in 1978. In France, back in the day, there was no FM band, only AM, and all the frequencies were owned by the government, and so the government didn't allow private entrepreneurs or companies to own a certain frequency, and didn't auction them like they do now. So there was very little radio entertainment, and it was very centralized amongst five big radio stations. And one of them was called Europe 1, Europe 1. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they had something called Hit Parade, which was a countdown of the top 20 songs. So you had Bee Gees back in 77, or it was the disco era, and so Bee Gees and Donna Summer and Gloria Gaynor and all these, plus some French, of course, a lot of French content, because law required that 50% of songs broadcast on the radio were French. So you had a lot of French singers and artists. So anyway, this was my go-to source for music. What's new, what's interesting, what's exciting. And it had its flaws, because it was very the bandwidth was very limited in terms of genres. But in 1978, Errol Dunkley had a song called "Okay Fred," which is a cover of John Holt song from Studio One. And "Okay Fred" cracked the top 5 in the pop charts in France. And this was my first discovery of reggae, and it sounded so weird compared to Supertramp or AC/DC or the disco thing, because the beat was not right. You know what I mean? Chakapoom, 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 and but the singing was great. The song. I mean, "Okay Fred." I mean, everybody can pronounce it, even in French. "Okay Fred." It works. I mean, it's very catchy. So this thing shot through the roof, and I was really captivated by it. And then a few months after that, or weeks after that, Bob Marley had "Is This Love?" So I started thinking, wow, this is really interesting. And a friend of mine in high school had the Third World album called "Journey to Addis," that had "Now That We Found Love," because "Now
Yeah.
That We Found Love" also made it big on the radio. So all of a sudden you had like 3 or 4 reggae songs, perking up, left and right, and I thought, wow, this is different. I wanted to know more, and and also, what was cool about reggae is that if you were a reggae fan, you were a minority. Not in terms of race or genre, but you were not part of the mainstream.
Right.
People. There were two types of people: those who listened to disco, and disco sucked for the others, and those who listened to AC/DC, and heavy metal sucked for the disco guys. So reggae was nowhere on between those two planets. It was somewhere else, and we were, the guys different. And there was weed and so forth. So it was really the cool, and the guys who knew about what they were doing. who listen to reggae. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're 14, 15, you want to differentiate yourself, uh, but still belong. So I I started, just at first I said, well, I don't really like reggae, but I like Bob Marley and Third World. And then I went to Bob Marley's concert in 1980 in Paris, and I got blown away because I was 50 meters away. So that's what, 200 feet? Because it was like 50,000 people and it was packed. And it was no seating back there. You stood and you crushed and in the crowd. And I'm small, so I couldn't really go near the stage, but I could hear the bass. And it really left a very strong impression. And I started, and my best friend from high school had his big brother who left to visit India for 6 months and left us with his record collection. And there was a lot of reggae: Gladiators, Spear, Grace Jones, etc., etc. I don't remember exactly. Max Romeo. So we started exploring this every Saturday night when we had done the homework. We were junior high. No, we're junior in high schools or seniors. So we would do our homework, and then on Saturday night, instead of going out to the disco or whatever, we would just play records and sometimes buy weed and do the little thing that high school kids do. And we got really good at discovering reggae. And then we continued like this for a couple of years, and I went to college to study business and finance and so forth. And there, back in the day, there was still no radio stations, but there were pirate radio stations. And I met some students from the engineering school that had built a little transmitter, and they were broadcasting illegally, but they were broadcasting. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. I'm going to be a rebel if I work with those guys, and I'm going to be so cool. And so I joined this thing because I really knew I had gotten to know about reggae, and explore that. Linton Kwesi Johnson and all these Aswad, Steel Pulse.
Right.
So they hired me to be part of the reggae show that was on Wednesday night at 9 in the evening for an and we had the last spot, so we could do 1 hour, which was the allotted spot. But since there was, they were playing tapes after that, we could just launch the tape machine at midnight, for example, if we played 3 hours of reggae. So I did this for 3 years, and then pirate radio stations got legalized by the government, and we started broadcasting further out, which was cool. And because I was from business school, I introduced advertisement. So yeah, I'm a Babylon, I'm instrument of Babylon and commercialism. It was pretty cool to have, the local pastry shop, or, at first, I mean, advertising meant something very local and very almost organic and neighborhood oriented. So I thought it was cool to get a little money and buy records, because at that time I didn't know that you could get free promo from labels and record companies.
Yeah.
So you know, I mean, we were so naive back then, but it was cool. I mean, we were playing our own records, so there was no conflict of interest. It was really the music we wanted to play, not the new Bob Marley or the new this or that. So to make a long story short, that's how I started in reggae. And then I graduated. I visited. I went to Algeria for 2 years to fulfill my military obligations, because in France you had to do your military service for a
Oh,
year.
okay.
And so instead of doing it in the army, I applied to do it as a civil servant for the French government abroad, and there was only one in 10 or 15 that was accepted, and my application was accepted, and I was sent to Algiers in Algeria, which is in North Africa. And there I discovered Algerian music, which I thought was rai, which I thought was very. It wasn't the same beat or the same, but it was the same attitude as ghetto music from Jamaica, and I
Mm-hmm.
loved it. And back in the 80s, it was the beginning of world music in Europe. You had that in the US too, but Paris was really a melting pot of Zaire, Senegal, Morocco, all of these influences mixed up with hip hop that was nascent at the time. And after Algeria, my wife is American, and we, instead of returning to France, we went to live in Chicago.
Oh.
So Midwest. Yeah. So I lived in the north side of Chicago, close to Wrigley Field, where all the blues bar were located.
Mm-hmm.
So there, I didn't really participate in the industry. I was just a consumer of reggae music, and they have a club called Park West, which is beautiful. Oh, and the acoustics were just great, and it was wonderful to see all these bands, because back then that was 40 some years ago or 35 years ago, and they were fresh still. Then I came back to Paris because I got an offer from another investment bank, and in 1995, late 1995, I had like uh, I wouldn't call it a midlife crisis, but I thought, look, I'm 30 something years old. I'm helping entrepreneurs make money and become rich, but I'm not creating myself something. And I thought it would be nice if I could create my own business. And and I thought, what is my passion? My passion is reggae music, you know, definitely. And one night I went to see a Third World. Third World is one of my favorite bands. I think they're great musicians. Bunny Ruggs was one of my top three singers. I mean, you can't beat Bunny Ruggs. So anyway, after the gig, we were walking in the street, and we walked by their tour bus, and Cat Core, the guitar player for Third World and founder of Third World, Cat Core, um, was standing by the bus, and I said, "Hey, can thank you for the concert." A little chit chat with the guy, and then I asked him, "Do you have a solo album?" Because Bunny Ruggs had just done a solo album that was called "Talking to You," and that had been released on Greensleeves a couple years before. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to have a solo album by Cat Core? I mean, he's one of the greatest instrumentalists and guitar players. And he said, "Well, you're the first one who asked me that question, but yes, I do." I said, "What? You do have?" And then I didn't know what I was doing, but I saw myself say to him, "I'm going to help you put it out." You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I started Taboo One. Because I I the next day we went to his hotel and listened to the cassettes he had, and I thought, wow, this is cool material. I like it, and and I didn't know anything about the music business, but I had faith, you know, and one of my clients uh, had a company that was flying people from France to the Caribbean, and he used music released by a label that belonged to one of his friends, and the label was called Declic Music. It was the biggest Caribbean music label in France, and during a meeting I said, well, I love Third World, I work with Third World, blah blah blah, and he said, oh, you should talk to my friend. So I went to his friend and got a deal for Catcore. You know, it was like miraculous, and and I didn't really, I was naive because I didn't realize that the guy was a shyster, but
Hmm.
I got him his album released, and it came out in 1996, and Catcore was so happy, and he made a little money, and it worked out okay, not great, but okay. And he invited me to the Reggae Splash in Chukka Cove in 1996, and he introduced me to everyone. Pablo Moses, Slan Robbie, Sugar Minot. I was like, it was Christmas for me because all these guys were legends to me, and all of a sudden you could shake hands with them and say hello, how are you, and I have this little label called Taboo One, and I was able to sign a couple of licenses to release some material, and Pablo Moses was the one who trusted me. And Pablo Moses, I asked him, why don't you ever do some dub versions of your albums? Because, your music lends itself to dubbing. And he said, well, I've never asked, but I do have the dub tracks of my albums. So I said, would you like to do it with me? Yes. And he said, well, yeah, sure. And I gave him an advance and this and that, and it got released in France. And so I did two albums with Pablo Moses. And one night I received a phone call from Donald Manning, who is the founder of the Abyssinians. And he said, um, Pablo Moses gave me your number. I have some material. Would you like to discuss something? I said, "Well, sure. I mean, Abyssinians is like, oh, I mean, yeah, bring it on." And we did an album called Satadub, which came out in 1998 or something like that. So I was doing reissues, well, actually, no, Satadub and Pablo Moses had not been released before, but it was all material.
Hmm.
And I admired greatly the Blood and Fire label, that Steve Barrow had created. And I was an imitator of graphically and so forth. I mean, here is clearly a poor imitation of what Steve was able to do.
Hmm.
Steve was really, he had money from the management of Simply Red, but he also had a vision from years of doing stuff in the reggae industry.
Right.
And I was a nobody compared to him. I mean, Steve is one of my inspirations.
Now, what we had over in the US through Heartbeat was declaration of dub. But one thing I noticed
Mm-hmm.
was that the transfer of the tapes were like at the wrong speed, so they were like at a faster speed.
Um, all right, I have the utmost respect for Chris Wilson from Heartbeat, but
Yeah.
on this one he screwed up because what happened is that Donald Manning screwed up the transfer of tapes onto DAT tapes.
Okay.
And on that machines, you have two settings, 44.1 and 48. And if you switch them wrong, I can't remember which one is which, but that was 25 years ago, so bear with my faulty memory. But if you don't put it on the right setting, the same setting as the master tape uh, machine, then you got to pitch a little too fast.
Okay.
So the first night I did the mastering, I listened to the thing at home, and I on the CD, and then I played the original, and I noticed this is not right. And I went back to the studio and said, "Well, look, the tempo is like, I'm just using an example, 80 beats per minute on the original songs, and it's 84 or 85 on the dub that we transferred. We got to slow the dub down to make it exactly the same tempo and pitch as the original songs.
Right.
So I was very lucky to have noticed it. I was lucky because I made some terrible mistakes in for Taboo, and one of the worst one was that I didn't listen carefully enough. You see, so it's really important to listen to your product. When Mike Brooks sold me what he alleged were recordings made over Lee Scratch Perry rhythms, and I I had it mastered. I didn't listen. I just listened to, I just pressed play on 5-10 seconds, just, and thought, okay, sounds cool, and then boom, 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 without listening to the whole thing. And I mean, and I'm gonna say it. He conned me, and he's a con artist, by the way. He
Hmm.
conned me. Um, I paid him the money, and the songs are 1 minute 20 seconds.
Ouch.
This It was such a fucking disaster, boss. I mean, I really screwed up, and I had it mastered. I didn't listen to the mastered product. The guy told me, "You sure you want to release this?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cool, cool, cool." Because I was so. I mean, I was back then. I was releasing 2 albums a month, and I was a one man team. I had an intern, you know, and I subcontracted the promotion and so forth to a press woman and press and radio girl. But I mean, it was a whirlwind, and I didn't listen enough, and I screwed up. So that album, when I realized how what I had done, um, I pulled them out from the shelf. I mean, the record store shelves. I had how do you say in English? A recall. So it cost me a ton of money because the logistics were terrible, and I mean, everything costs money. Another mistake I've made is to sometimes spend too much money on production compared to the money uh, I had. And one thing that I have done is produce a reggae meets rye album called Big Man,
Hmm.
which was a collection of combinations between Arabic singers and Jamaican singers and Algerian singers. Well, no, there was a Moroccan, North African singers and Jamaican singers, and so each was a duet. It it didn't. I spent too much money because Virgin gave me a big advance and encouraged me to spend even more because they were going to do a huge release out of it. And September 11 came just as we were finalizing the album, and I had spent more than the advance because I thought it would. They told me they were going to do an initial run of 80,000 copies. So I multiplied 80,000 by the future royalties I was going to get instead of just looking at the money I had. I spent the money I didn't have. And when September 11 came, all the retailers pulled Arabic music
Oh shoot.
out of the shelf.
Hmm.
The publicity was bad. And so I instead of having an initial run of 80,000, we had an initial run of 1,500, and you
Ouch.
can't make money on 1,500. Yeah, that was bad. So that was a big mistake I made. You know,
Hmm.
and this album really was. Ah, well, we screwed up. I mean, we had Gregory Isaacs, Shaka Dimas and Pliers, Horace Andy, Uroy, a lot of top singers. But I want to reissue it as an NFT.
Oh,
Well, we'll go into that later, but I think NFTs could be a new way of distributing music that could be complementary to the streaming thing and could make artists earn a little bit more money.
right.
So I'm building the taboo1.com platform that next year will sell music NFTs.